When it came time for my daughter to apply to college, she said, "Mom, you never told me about your college experiences, and this is why." I was madly in love with him, my college English professor. He was my TA in English going for his PhD. It was my sophomore year in college. I was 19, he was 25. It all began the first day of class at the Honors Tutorial College of Ohio University, in an English class on moral responsibility as seen through the eyes of writers. I listened enraptured as Nigel Bryce Radcliffe explained the Kitty Genovese case and posed questions about our views on moral responsibility. My brain was exploding with new thoughts, ideas, and questions, and so was my heart. Professor Radcliffe was brilliant, handsome, and untouchable. He looked like a young version of Hugh Grant. When he lectured, there was an intelligent aloofness about him. There wasn't snobbery, but something that said, "I don't know it all either. I'm just a passenger on this journey too," as if he could level the playing field. After class, I'd watch him through his office window, sexily smoking cigarettes. Each time he raised one to his mouth, the afternoon light caught the glint of a gold wedding band on his left hand. Then he came to me in a dream. It was a visitation, omniscient, an intuition so strong, like nothing I'd ever experienced. It was a romantic fairy tale, my prince has come type dream. When I woke up, it felt so real I was convinced it was a sign, a vision of our future. The next day, I ran into him in front of the student union. Shaking with fear, I told him about my dream. He said he'd had a dream about me too, that he'd been thinking about me. He asked if I would meet him after class. We took a drive out into the hills of southwestern Ohio and parked by a graveyard covered with fiery fall leaves. Walking amidst the headstones, we kissed for the first time. One kiss, then another and another. Soon I was drunk with love. The next few weeks, while his wife was away on business, we spent all our time together. But crazy as I was for him, I felt guilty. He was cheating on his wife. And although I'd never seen her on campus, I was fearful I might bump into her. My older brother, always the voice of reason, called, and I confessed everything. "He's married," he warned me. "But he said he'd leave his wife for me," I chirped confidently. The optimism and arrogance of youth. The next day, I left a letter for Nigel in his mailbox telling him I couldn't see him until he had divorced his wife. 10 days later, Nigel had left his wife, hired an attorney, and filed for divorce. His wife moved out, and I moved into Nigel's house, deep in the country, 30 miles from town. Just like magic, my dream had come true. Every day was blissful as we began to build our life together. Just watching him sleep on the pillow next to me was thrill enough. For the first time, I had an anchor, him for me and me for him. And we would be married. Then something strange began to happen. Other professors began leaving their wives for their students. Apparently, I had started a trend. We had quickly become a small community of adulterers. The newest convert to our community was Professor Jonah Brummel, a Keats expert and son of a Southern Baptist minister. He had left his wife and 2 young children for freshman Karina, a fragile Nordic-looking blonde. They moved in with us to stabilize, a word I use loosely as we were all living in a kind of parallel universe. We hosted many parties together with lots of booze and pot-filled nights around big bonfires where Jonah would satirize his father's evangelical healings. One by one, we would all stand in line waiting for redemption. Then, one day, while breezing through the local town paper, I saw it, the legal notice about divorces. And there it was in black and white. Nigel Bryce Radcliffe divorced from Elizabeth Ryan Radcliffe. Grounds, adultery. Suddenly, I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. Oh my God, I'm an adulterer. I have just destroyed a marriage. Nigel had seen the paper too. I started crying. He tried to assure me it wasn't my fault. We'd fallen in love. It was out of our hands. But a niggling voice kept telling me it wasn't. At Christmas, I took Nigel home to New Jersey to meet my family and cement our future. He told my father he wanted to marry me, but there was no way my father would consent to this marriage. To his face, he said it was because he wasn't Jewish, but privately, he told me that Nigel seemed unstable. We were crushed, and Nigel fell into a deep depression. Back in Ohio, Nigel's depression still hadn't lifted. He confessed he'd been having acid flashbacks. He'd be outside looking at the house, and suddenly the paint would start peeling off, and the edifice would begin to crack and crumble. These episodes became more frequent. I began having anxiety attacks. The man had left his wife for me. The fissures in our relationship had become cracks, and my overwhelming guilt would not allow me to admit the terror I was feeling as I watched Nigel fall apart. Nigel's biggest fear was that he'd end up in the mental hospital on the hill. The more depressed he became, the more anxious I grew. I knew I had to leave, but I couldn't force myself to tell him. The doctor prescribed an anti-anxiety pill for me, which gave me the clarity to know I had to jump ship or drown. I was so desperate for him to get better, I suggested he get back together with his wife, anything to stop his pain. Finally, I suggested we take a break. "You can't leave me now," he said. "You're all I have." Then he went to the closet, took out a rifle, and walked outside. It was a pitch black night. And then a gunshot went off. I can still hear the echo. A few minutes later, Nigel walked back inside the house. Now my fear was overtaken with rage. The divide between us had become too big, his instability too daunting. I decided to move back into the dorm. The next time I saw Nigel was in the mental hospital on the hill. He had tried to commit suicide. My father's prediction had been right. As karma would have it, many years later, my own marriage was shattered by betrayal. Like Nigel's wife, I had the rug pulled out from under me and suddenly had to face a life I hadn't wanted, anticipated, or planned for. So while I didn't tell my daughter that college experience, I did tell her this: never date a married man, and be sure to take a class on moral responsibility. When you're a little older, I'll tell you why.